All right, welcome back to Schlyde into Sports, live on 103.1 FM on WVLP Radio. I'm your host, Ryan Schleier, and here we talk about college sports rules and regulations and how they trickle down into all the sports. Right now, preseason for football has been heating up with the AP poll coming out yesterday and the Coaches Poll coming out last week, and now people are comparing the two, and I personally like comparing the two just because it gives you more of a sense of where the coaches are higher on whether, compared to certain teams versus media personalities. Now, obviously, with coaches and media personalities, there's going to be a little bit of bias towards their team. I mean, you guys know that I'm a big IU football fan. You guys heard my rankings last week. I had Indiana at number 1, but that bias is pretty known to all of you, and I do try to be objective with it as much as possible. But, at least in comparison to the AP poll and the coaches poll, it does not seem objective by any means. So, yeah, but I promise it is completely objective. I just feel like I'm taking more into account the defensive pieces that Indiana's are turning. It reminds me a lot of the Georgia team from 2022, where their defense was just absolutely unstoppable and nobody could score against them. I mean, that was the year that Georgia just absolutely throttled TCU. So that's one of the main reasons why I have Indiana at number 1 in my rankings. But we are going to compare the AP poll and coaches poll in the first half hour of the show. And we're also going to talk about Curt Cignetti taking shots at Notre Dame, as well as looking ahead to week 1 of the college football season, because there are some games that we're going to need to pay attention to. One of the fun stats, at least that I've noticed the past 5 years, is that at least one of the top 10 teams gets upset in week 1. And of course, I'm talking about one of the preseason ranked teams that's in the top 10 gets upset in week 1, and that would be by the AP poll for all of those years. So just looking into those, seeing which team is most likely going to get upset or get served their first loss of the season. I think there's a couple games that might surprise you. There's a couple games that might just surprise you. But with that being said, let's compare the AP poll and the coaches poll. So first, let's just look at the AP poll rankings for the preseason this year. So we have Ohio State at 1. That has not changed, at least from the coaches poll. We've got Ohio State at 1, Oregon at 2, Georgia at 3. Notre Dame and Texas switch 4 and 5. So Notre Dame is at 4 and Texas is at 5. Indiana stays at 6. Miami stays at 7. Texas A&M is at 8th. Ole Miss at 9. Oklahoma at 10. LSU 11. Texas Tech 12. Alabama at 13. BYU 14. Tied with USC. So BYU and USC are tied at 14. Michigan is 16th. Washington 17th. 18th is Penn State. So a nice little cluster of Big Ten teams there. Then you've got SMU at 19, Tennessee at 20, Utah at 21, Iowa at 22, Houston at 23, Louisville at 24, and Missouri at 25. And there was a slew of teams that got receiving votes, and that's normally the case in these preseason polls. You're going to see a lot of teams in that other receiving votes category. So you've got Clemson, Florida, Boise State, Arizona, TCU, Navy, South Carolina, Illinois, Oklahoma State, Vanderbilt, Pittsburgh, Virginia Tech, Minnesota, UNLV, New Mexico, Georgia Tech, James Madison, Auburn, Memphis, Cal, Liberty, Western Michigan, Tulane, and Virginia. A lot of those teams that were in the receiving votes category, I actually have them in my current rankings. One of the teams that you'll probably note that was in the coaches poll but is not in the AP top 25 is Clemson. And this is actually the first time since 2012 that Clemson has not made it into the top 25. This is also the first time in a long time that Alabama sits outside of the top 10 in the preseason polls, both for the AP. Well, actually, no, just for the AP, because Alabama on the coaches poll, I believe they were 10th, if I'm not mistaken. No, they were 11th. So in both polls, they're sitting outside of the top 10, which is a first time in a long time. But yeah, I think BYU USC is also the first tie that the AP has seen in a while in their preseason poll. So that's also something to note as well. It's pretty clear that, the AP is definitely higher on some teams than others. I think they're a little bit higher on Notre Dame. That's pretty normal. I mean, Notre Dame does have the lucrative deal with NBC, and, I feel like they do tend to get favorable talking points, I guess, towards them. Like they do get talked about very favorably in the media, so that kind of makes sense. And I do understand the hesitation to put Texas up higher than 5th, at least in terms of the AP voters, just because in the preseason AP poll last year, if you guys do remember, Texas was at number 1 and they lost in that week 2 game against Ohio State. So I think they're thinking twice about Texas. Maybe Texas is going to start off slow. Maybe that's kind of the angle that the media voters were leaning, but nonetheless, that was the most notable top 5 switch in the AP poll. Every other thing was mostly the same. I think the AP voters definitely lower on Alabama. That's not entirely a surprise. A lot higher on LSU. LSU and Alabama just flipping spots right there. BYU USC, that tie was definitely unexpected. BYU being all the way down at 14. Well, I mean, it is one rank higher than the coaches poll, but I still think that BYU is being completely undervalued here, especially in terms of just the Big 12 in comparison to Texas Tech with the losses that Texas Tech has recently suffered. But yeah, I think Michigan, Washington, Penn State, interesting having those 3 teams kind of smushed together there. Each team having decent ceilings, can just kind of considering their circumstances. Penn State pretty much having a completely new roster. They're basically Iowa State at this point. Washington, they have Damon Williams. He's a now veteran quarterback that they have. He was one of the best quarterbacks last year. And then you've got Michigan, who has a new head coach, definitely an upgrade from Sharon Moore. So it's going to be interesting to see how Michigan turns it around with Kenny Dillingham. Utah being ranked at 21, I just don't understand I don't understand why Utah's ranked, to be completely honest, or being favored by both the AP voters and the coaches. They just lost their offensive coordinator and head coach. So I don't understand the trust in Utah to just get it done. Maybe they just they just couldn't think of any other teams and they just thought, Utah, they're always there. Why not just put them there again? I don't know. But yeah, it's pretty hard to come up with justification sometimes. The addition of Louisville that the AP poll has, I like that addition. I think Louisville is a really solid team. I have them in my rankings. I think I have them, they're in the 20s somewhere in my rankings. But I do like the AP voters kind of bringing Louisville in there. Again, don't really understand why Tennessee is ranked. They're ranked at 20th. We still don't even really know who their quarterback is going to be. So having Tennessee ranked at this point in the year doesn't really make that much sense to me. It just really doesn't make that much sense. I don't think they've really made any sort of, what's the word? Notable additions from the transfer portal. There's a lot of unknowns with this Tennessee team. So them being ranked in the top 20 in both the AP and the coaches poll is just kind of baffling to me. I just don't understand. But here we are nonetheless. And then both polls have Missouri ranked at 25th, which is another one I don't completely understand because there's a little bit more uncertainty at quarterback with Missouri, or at least less confidence at the quarterback position at Missouri. They are going to have Amon Hardy back, but you can only do so much with one player on your team, especially at the running back position. He wasn't necessarily the most versatile running back. Like, he wasn't necessarily the best at catching the ball. Like, I feel like Jeremiah Love was the most versatile running back last year because, well, yeah, he was probably the most versatile running back last year. But I just don't think that only Amon Hardy being there for Missouri is going to be enough for Missouri to be able to justify being in the top 25. I feel like there's other teams that have made additions, and I have talked about them, and I have them in my rankings that I think deserve a spot in the top 25. But yeah, one of the things I saw, the SEC shuffle, I already talked about it, but the AP poll significantly higher on LSU than the coaches and put them ahead of Alabama, and the coaches preferred Alabama. But I will say, just again, kind of going back to IU a little bit, IU being sixth in both of those polls, I think that's a mistake from both polls, especially the coaches poll, because when you think about it this way, you're voting on like your colleagues in a way. I mean, they are colleagues because they're all at the same level in the college football world, so they are considered colleagues. But putting the defending national champions at sixth, not even in the top five, but at sixth, I feel like is just a continuation of last year at the beginning of the season, just the constant doubt that people have. And it's like, I don't really know what more Indiana can do to prove that they should be in the top five in the preseason or the number one spot, which is where I have them. I don't know. It doesn't really make much sense to me. I feel like the additions in the portal were great. I feel like the defensive pieces coming back were also great. I mean, the coaches, again, like I said last week, they were not able to, I guess, have an informed vote because the result of that case in Colorado kind of hindered their ability to make decisions based off of the case. So I'm kind of giving the coaches a little bit of a pass, but the AP voters, I mean, I feel like, it definitely could have been a little bit better. But when I was looking at the AP poll, something that I found really interesting actually was the number of votes that teams got. So you can look and see like the amount of points that each team has in the preseason poll, or at least the amount of votes. And one of the things that I found quite interesting was the way that the number one votes were dispersed amongst the AP voters. Not necessarily who voted for who, but just the facts, like just the way the numbers kind of computed themselves. And how do I put this? Just how the numbers computed themselves and how the points just kind of stacked up with everybody, I thought was quite interesting. So just to kind of clarify, so with the AP poll, like as I'm sure you guys know, 1 point is worth first place vote is worth 25 points, a second place is 24 points, and so on. And it counts down and a vote at 25th is 1 point. So it just continually counts down like that. But one of the things that I found interesting with the way that the number one votes were dispersed is that it went all the way down to 7. So Ohio State got the most number 1 votes, which, I mean, they are at the top of the AP poll, so them getting the most number of AP poll votes is not entirely surprising. For that number 1 spot, they had 40. Oregon had 14 number 1 votes, and they came in second. Georgia, who came in third, got 0 first place votes. Notre Dame got 6 first place votes, got 4th. Texas got 5th, but 0 first place votes. Indiana got 6th on the poll, but 8 number 1 votes. And Miami got 7th with 1 first place vote. So the reason why I find this interesting is because it, just looking at the first place votes, it really paints a picture of how some people could maybe be overvaluing a team and some people could maybe be undervaluing a team as well, or maybe doing the undervaluing more than the overvaluing. So let's just take Indiana, for example, here. Indiana, 6th place in the AP poll. They got the 3rd most number 1 votes out of all the teams that got number 1 votes. And they're sitting in 6th place. And that tells me, even just without looking at what everybody else put on their ballot, like I'm not even looking at what other people put on their ballot, this just tells you that some people had Indiana all the way up at 1, but some people might have had Indiana probably as low as 12 or 11. And that's why they got bumped all the way down to 6. So there's just the dramatic, like, height, or, you know, it wasn't even really that dramatic of a height. They were last year's national champions, and again, I listed all my reasons before as to why Indiana should be at the number 1 spot, but then there's some people who maybe aren't as impressed by the additions in the transfer portal as I am. Maybe they doubt Josh Hoover at quarterback after the turnovers that he was committing last year at TCU. Maybe they didn't really care about the defensive returns that Indiana is going to have. And as a result, they put them down outside of the top 10. And, you know, that is a possibility. I mean, you look at Notre Dame as well. They got six first place votes, but the separation between their highest vote and lowest vote was lower, or it was, you know, the gap was less than what Indiana's was. Notre Dame, they probably had, you know, they had 6 people vote first. They probably had a few vote second and third and fourth. They probably, I imagine that people probably had Notre Dame as low as 7 or 8 in their polls. And I've seen some people's rankings that are not associated with the AP poll online that have Notre Dame as low as 7 or 8. So that makes the most sense to me as to why Notre Dame would be at 4th, despite having more number 1 votes than Georgia. But Notre Dame, if you're just taking into account the first place votes, Notre Dame should be 4th anyway, because Indiana does have the 3rd most first place votes. So Indiana, like, just looking at the amount of first place votes, Indiana in a way is 3rd, but that's besides the point. And then Miami being kind of that sole other team that got a first place vote. So the other thing that tells me is that there is still a little bit of SEC bias, because if Georgia and Texas are both at 3 and 5, despite not having a first place vote, that tells me that a lot of people had them at either 2, 3, 4, or 5, or maybe 6 in the case of Texas. But majority of voters, I'm sure, had Texas and Georgia in their top 5, and that's why they're sitting above Indiana, Miami, and in Georgia's case, Notre Dame. So again, there is a little bit of SEC bias that is still existent in the realm of college football, but as you guys can see, the Big Ten has the 3 most or the three schools that have the most first place votes. So there's a little bit of separation as well within the voters as to who the top school is, at least in terms of the Big Ten. Obviously, the majority of voters that did put a Big Ten school at the top put Ohio State at the top, or they probably put Ohio State at second, which is why Ohio State ended up being at the top of the poll. Oregon, they had 14 votes for first place. They were probably in everybody's top three in the AP poll. Indiana, 8 first place votes, but they're down at 6. So, again, some people really like what they see from Indiana going into the preseason. Either that or they're just tired of doubting Indiana like Josh Pate is. I mean, he's said that several times on his show. But some people at this point are just sick and tired of doubting Indiana and just being proven wrong. So they're just kind of riding the coattails, riding the hype train, if you will, with Indiana. And I think in the case of Miami, I didn't see who put the number one vote up for Miami, but it was either out of respect for the fact that Miami is returning Malachi Toney, they are returning Fletcher Jr., like they are returning a lot of the guys at the skill position. They have Darian Mensah, like their offense is going to look really good despite the losses on defense, and maybe they have a little bit more faith in Miami heading into this year than other teams like Indiana, for instance, or maybe they put Miami at first and then Indiana at second, just out of respect for those two schools that finished at the top of the pyramid in college football last year. So there is that as well. I will say something that was very surprising to me, at least with both of the polls, was Texas Tech. It didn't really seem like either poll moves Texas Tech down at all. I think pre-preseason, like the way too early rankings that I've made fun of a lot, had Texas Tech up as high as 7 or 8 going into this season. And now they're down at 12. But with the loss of Brendan Sorsby, I don't think that that's a low enough start. I don't think it's necessarily fair to keep them up that high, because I do think that making those adjustments in late in the preseason will end up hurting Texas Tech more than helping them. So I think Texas Tech, if I'm not mistaken, I think I had them at 14th. So it's not too much lower, but it is still considerably lower than what other people have Texas Tech at. Again, Texas Tech can obviously prove me wrong and go a little bit crazy. Yeah, I did have Texas Tech at 14. But yeah. And just re-looking back at my rankings, there's definitely teams that I am overvaluing in comparison to the AP preseason and the coaches poll. I'm definitely overvaluing BYU. I like what I see with BYU. Maybe you could argue that I'm undervaluing Georgia and Texas a little bit, overvaluing IU and Miami in comparison. Michigan, I have them in my top 10, so there's an argument there that I'm overvaluing Michigan. And Notre Dame. I mean, I have Notre Dame at 2, so you could make the argument that I'm putting too much value on Notre Dame. Texas A&M, I have them at 15, and the AP poll and the coaches poll have Texas A&M at 8th in their poll. So I'm pretty severely undervaluing Texas A&M there. Definitely overvaluing Arizona and Virginia Tech, neither of which appear on the AP poll or the coaches poll. So again, there's that. Georgia Tech is another one of those schools that's not on either of the polls, but I have them at 21st. I've got Louisville in my poll. The AP poll has that. And again, they're at 24th on my poll. The AP poll also has them at 24th. So there are some rankings that or at least some of the teams I have ranked that are in line with what either the coaches have or the AP have. But there is some pretty drastic differences in terms of who I'm valuing and why in comparison to what the coaches are valuing and what the AP voters are valuing. I think ultimately, like, I kind of like looking at preseason rankings just because I like seeing what other people are thinking going into the college football season. However, with the rankings, it can get tricky because we base, like, and this is one of the flaws that I've harped on when it comes to college football for as long as I can remember. But I ultimately don't like preseason rankings because that becomes the basis of a quality win. And the issue that brings is that, yes, maybe Tennessee, maybe Tennessee isn't so bad. But what happens if Tennessee starts off the year 3-4? Do all 4 of those losses count as quality wins for the teams that they played, even though they have a losing record? I don't necessarily think that it's fair that that's the case, simply because those 4 losses could all be in-conference losses to teams that also are not very good. And this is part of the issue that myself and more people are starting to have with the media narratives when it comes to SEC bias. This is why people say that SEC bias exists. It's because of the preseason rankings, because every preseason SEC teams are pretty highly valued. I mean, you look at Georgia and Texas. I have neither of them in my top 5, and both of them are in the top 5 in the Coaches Poll and the AP poll. And the SEC has not had a team make the national championship in 3 years now. And yet we continually put them in the top 5 every single preseason. And then ultimately what happens is, again, going back to Texas and even Florida, you go back to, when did Texas and Florida play? I think it was week 4 or 5 of the season last year. Texas was ranked 3rd or something, and Florida also, for some reason, was ranked somehow above South Florida, even though South Florida beat them. But again, that's besides the point. Texas ends up going to Florida and they lose. And then they fell out of the top 25 completely because that Florida loss was so bad. Because at the time, Florida had a losing record despite being ranked, I believe it was 15th last year in the preseason poll. And when it comes to these preseason polls, especially if you're betting on games, you don't want to do it based off the preseason rankings because that's where you see the most shakeup. If anything, that's the best time to bet teams that are not favored or would not be considered the betting favorite if you're looking at the rankings. Like if, let's just say Indiana and Georgia play and Indiana wins. Like, let's just say that's a week 1 game and Georgia's ranked 3rd and Indiana's ranked 6th and Indiana wins. That would be a great upset game to pick because it's the preseason rankings. There's not really a lot of legitimacy. That's the only word I can really think of to describe the preseason rankings in terms of the legitimacy that they actually hold on the season. But with preseason rankings, like, it doesn't necessarily matter how you start the season when we haven't even seen any of these teams actually play yet. Sure, we've seen spring ball. We've seen moves that have happened. We know how some of these players play because we've seen them play last year. But with especially in this transfer portal era, we don't know how players are going to play together after they switch up teams or when head coaches leave, right? There's more factors that need to be considered, at least with these preseason rankings, that I feel like neither the coaches poll or the AP poll really truly take into account. And I feel like at least, especially when it comes to coaching changes, I feel like that is something that I do a much better job of taking into account. Okay, so now that I'm done with my little rant about the rankings, about the preseason rankings, the AP poll, and the top 25 poll, we're going to get into Curt Cignetti essentially calling out Notre Dame and the week 1 schedule. But before we do that, we're going to take a quick little break and hear a message from our sponsor.
This broadcast is brought to you by Authentic Impact, a Northwest Indiana executive coaching practice working with family businesses to ensure their legacy. When you started your business, you made a promise to do things differently, better than anyone else. Over time, as the business grows, that promise can get diluted or even lost. Penny Schlyde at Authentic Impact helps family business owners reignite that promise, weaving it into team engagement, performance, and hiring so your passion becomes the heartbeat of your company again. Learn more at authentic-impact-coaching.com.
Okay, so Curt Cignetti, he had a quick little comment about Notre Dame because there was this whole controversy surrounding Notre Dame and who canceled on who and why and all that stuff. And people were saying that Cignetti was chickening out of playing Notre Dame, so on and so forth. And he responded to those comments, which he responded to that, but not the Purdue thing, which I thought was kind of funny, which in a way is a statement in and of itself, if you think about it, because it really shows that at least he doesn't really see Purdue as competition when it comes to football. And Notre Dame is, well, they're in the state of Indiana, so they could become that new in-state rival that drives, more people inside of Indiana to the sport of football, make it more of a football state than it is already becoming, with 2 schools that have been in the top 25, or not even top 25 anymore, but top 15 in the AP poll consistently over the last 2 years. I think, it's something that's brewing, and I think he's stirring the pot a little bit, which is what is needed for this rivalry. So this past Friday, Cignetti was asked about the recently canceled series with the Irish, and he said, "I'd like to play Notre Dame. They ought to come to our place twice, and we'll go there once since they're not in a conference." And just kind of breaking that down a little bit, just for added context here. Normally when people schedule like this, where they do 2 home and 1 away, schools like Indiana and Wisconsin, Ohio State, Mississippi State, Alabama, LSU, so on and so forth, like the traditional Power 4 conference schools will schedule these games will schedule a series of games like this over the course of 3 years with group of 5 schools. And since Notre Dame is not in a conference, essentially what Cignetti is saying with the way that he wants the game scheduled is, well, Notre Dame is not in a Power 4 conference despite being treated like a Power 4 school, so we're going to treat them like a group of 5 school because they're not in a conference and they play a group of 5 like schedule. That's essentially what he's trying to say without actually saying it. And he's made comments like this before where it has led to certain change. You look at last year, he made comments about the SEC conference schedule only being 8 games compared to the Big Ten's 9 games that they play. And what happened? Well, the SEC changed to a 9-game conference schedule. The ACC did the same thing. They now play a 9-game conference schedule due to, it's not necessarily due to Cignetti calling out the SEC, but it definitely, stirred the pot enough to bring up the discussion. And that's part of the reason why the SEC made the change that they made. But with Cignetti, with his comment, like I said before, it's leaning into that narrative of Notre Dame not playing anybody, really that legitimate. And sure, this year you look at Miami and BYU, like those are both really solid opponents. But outside of Miami and BYU, there's not really a school that would really challenge Notre Dame all that well. I'll go into a school that is on their schedule that I think could maybe surprise some people. Be partially because it's an earlier game in their schedule, but we'll get into that in a little bit. That's for the last part of the show. But he's also using this to fire up the Indiana fan base, fire up the Big Ten fan base. But considering the fact that Notre Dame was able to get the College Football Playoff Committee to cave and give them a playoff spot if they make the top 12, like even if it's 12th, then it's going to be pretty hard for Notre Dame to cave simply because Cignetti, said something that maybe hurt their feelings a little bit. But I think, him taking it and running after winning a national championship is completely valid, especially considering the fact that Notre Dame is the last team that Indiana has lost to. So I think out of anybody, like on either side, I think Indiana definitely wants to play Notre Dame. Just speaking as an IU fan, I think like we absolutely want to play Notre Dame. We want to beat them. Like we need to humble them. That's just kind of how we feel. Because right now they're just they're hanging over the playoff loss that we had almost 2 years ago now over our heads after us winning a national championship, despite Notre Dame not winning a national championship since 1988. So that's also something to consider. But yeah, I think with some legitimacy though, like part of the reason why some people aren't necessarily taking the comment seriously is because outside of the Big Ten, Indiana, like we ourselves don't really play anybody that is a heavyweight outside of our conference that's not in the playoffs. But I feel like with the Big Ten schedule, it's almost okay to do that simply because of the amount of travel that you have to do as a Big Ten school now in college football. Like we have 4 schools on the West Coast. We have a bunch of schools on the East Coast. We have schools in the Midwest. Like, there's a lot of travel involved if you are a Big Ten football school. And that ultimately, I think, is what helps them be prepared the best for the national championship game. Or not even the national championship game, but to play in the college football playoffs the way that they do. So yeah, I feel like, that's something, I guess. Some people are citing at least the series is that we've canceled the Virginia and Louisville series. But the thing with the Louisville series is that series was made before Cignetti was there. And I think he was just trying to establish himself. And again, we didn't really have any control, or at least, the football team didn't really have any control over who plays who when. It's more of the athletic director, like upper levels in the athletic department that have more of a say in who Indiana plays. or really who any team plays, like just any athletic department. They're the ones that have control over who their teams play. So, yeah. The one with Virginia, I think there's a little bit more legitimacy in that argument to say that they were ducking away from Virginia. But, I mean, Virginia wasn't necessarily like a powerhouse per se. I mean, yeah, they're a Power 4 school, but at the time they weren't necessarily considered a powerhouse. But at the same time, when we canceled the series with Virginia, they did end up beating Florida State, who ended up being ranked after beating Alabama in week 1 last year. So I think that, at least in terms of Virginia, I think, or at least the Virginia series, I think if people are trying to make the argument that Cignetti was running away from Virginia, I think that one has the most weight. The Louisville one, not necessarily, because that series was going on before Cignetti got there, and it was like a home, away, and a neutral site, because they played in Indy one year, and then I think they were going to do like one in Bloomington and one in Louisville, if I'm remembering correctly. But then Tom Allen got fired, and so the team was just kind of in shambles. And yeah, as a result, we canceled the Louisville series. But yeah, not a lot you can really do there, but it is what it is. Okay, so let's go into some of these week 1 games here really fast. And there's a lot of week 1 games. They start August 29th, so not next week, but the following week. So we will still kind of be able to talk a little bit more about them, I guess, if you guys like. I mean, I don't know. It is week 1, so maybe not. I mean, we'll probably be able to get through all the games for week 1, but if there's any sort of injury updates, I can provide, I'll be able to provide you guys with those leading into the week 1 games. But for right now, we can at least just talk about the games that carry the most weight and are the most, are going to be the most important to watch going into the college football season. I'm also going to talk about teams that I think could get upset as a result of, who they're playing. But yeah, I think just to note, obviously UNC TCU will be an interesting one. I don't really know who's going to win out of the two teams, but I think TCU definitely has a little bit more to, UNC definitely has a little bit to fight for as well, just because Bill Belichick, he didn't really do the best job last year with what he had. But yeah, that's going to be the first game to kick off the college football season. That one I think is it is in Ireland. So that's going to be the first college football game of the season. I think another game that will be interesting as well is NC State versus Virginia. That game was scheduled as a non-conference game as a result of the cancellation of the Indiana-Virginia home series. So I think that one will be interesting to watch as well. We saw Virginia barely escape NC State last year, and then they turned around and then they beat a ranked Florida State later on in the year. So I think this is definitely going to be a tough game, but it'll be a great opportunity to kind of see Virginia tested week 1, because there has been some hype behind Virginia, at least on social media, not necessarily with, the mainstream media or the coaches, but I think there is a little bit of hype behind Virginia heading into this year on social media. So I think Virginia is a team to kind of keep an eye out for. I'm calling them kind of the social media champions, even though, I don't know. I mean, a lot of people are hyping up the main teams, but out of all the teams that are not ranked in the top 25 or in either of the polls, I feel like Virginia has the most hype behind them as a potential dangerous team. Memphis UNLV, that's one that can shape up at least the group of 5 sphere. Memphis, from the American Athletic, UNLV from the Mountain West. I think both those schools, pretty decent football schools. It's going to be interesting to see what Memphis looks like without their previous head coach. I mean, they're going to be under new management this year, so I think that's going to be something to watch. UNLV, their quarterback from last year transferred to Nebraska, so we're going to see a new quarterback at UNLV in the starting position. So just keeping an eye on those two pieces there, I think will be interesting to watch as well. Let's see. Georgia Tech, Colorado. Colorado, I don't even know what to think about Colorado. I feel like they're just a hype train, and that's pretty much it. They're not a team that I really take all that seriously, especially after last year. They looked really bad, and maybe that's because they had a really young team, or maybe it's because Dion can only coach his sons, and his sons are not there anymore. So I don't know. I also think that, I mean, like I said last week and also this week, Georgia Tech is a team that I have ranked in my top 25. And a lot of that has to do with Alberto Mendoza. I think that he's one of the most underrated quarterbacks heading into this year. I feel like there's so much potential with him, and I really do think that him on Georgia Tech is going to make a huge difference. They also have DeAndre Hopkins as the wide receivers coach. He retired out of the NFL, and he is now helping Georgia Tech wide receivers. So I think it will be interesting to see what this Georgia Tech team looks like. But at least in terms of who I think is going to win, I think Georgia Tech is absolutely going to win. Out of all the matches that you would probably consider close matches, I feel like Georgia Tech, Colorado is the most confident one that I can call like the outcome for, even though we're a week and a half out from that game. But I still feel very confident in that game. Okay. Moving on. Well, I guess week 1 is kind of a really long week because it starts August 29th, but then it ends September 5th. Yeah, it's kind of whack, but what can you do? I mean, some teams play twice in week 1, but yeah, week 1 is just a enigma in college football at this point. But yeah. Okay, another game. Louisville Ole Miss. And this one, I kind of had my eyes on this one before the AP poll came out and even before the Coaches Poll came out because I had a feeling that both Louisville and Ole Miss were going to be ranked after how they did last year. I feel like both teams overperformed, or I guess outperformed their expectations from last year. And as a result of that, they got favorable ranking in the preseason poll. I think Ole Miss keeping Kewan Lacey and Trinidad Chambliss also had something to do with that. Louisville keeping some of their secondaries on defense after how they performed last year. I think that is also a huge factor. Jeff Brom as a coach, also a huge factor as well. And this is one of those matches where we could potentially see a top 10 upset week 1. So that is absolutely going to be one to keep an eye on. That's going to be September 6th at 6:30 p.m. So it's going to be prime time on September 6th. Another game that I think could maybe surprise some people is Wisconsin versus Notre Dame. And this one is going to be in Lambeau Field in Wisconsin. So Wisconsin's going to have a little bit of a home field advantage there. And the reason why I have this one marked is because of how Notre Dame has started their seasons the last few years. When you look back at, not last year, but look back at 2 years ago, they lost to Northern Illinois at home. And I think that was either week 2 or week 3. Either way, it was early on, and they didn't look the best in weeks 1 or 2 either. It was a pretty slow start for Notre Dame, but then they ended it going to a national championship. You look back at last year, their 2 toughest opponents were in week 1, or within the first 3 weeks. They lose to Miami on the road, 21-24, I think is what the score was. It was only 3 points that they lost by, and then they lost by 1 point to Texas A&M at home due to a botched extra point kick. So, Notre Dame the past couple years has been known for their slow starts. And this game is week 1. So, I think keeping that in mind and considering the fact that Notre Dame is a top 10 opponent, they do fit that criteria of an early upset. Now, Wisconsin, they had a tough, very tough schedule last year. Their schedule was arguably the toughest out of anybody's schedule in college football. They played Alabama on the road in week 3. They then played Michigan on the road to start off their October. Played Iowa at home, lost 37-0. Played Ohio State at home, lost 34-0. Played Oregon on the road, lost 21-7. Played Washington at home. They did get a win there. That was a huge win that they got. But then they lost to Indiana, 7-31. They beat Illinois the week after that, 27-10. And then they lost to Minnesota 7-17. So Wisconsin played arguably the upper teams in the Big Ten. I mean, you look at how the Big Ten finished up. Like Indiana finished first, Ohio State finished second, Oregon was third. I think it was either USC or Iowa that was fourth. But either way, then Michigan is in there. A lot of these teams in the Big Ten were in the top half of the Big Ten that Wisconsin played. Not to mention the fact that Wisconsin also played Alabama in a non-conference game earlier that year, and Alabama made the playoffs and they made the quarterfinals of the playoffs. So Wisconsin had an insanely tough schedule last year. And now they're playing Notre Dame week 1. This is a huge, huge opportunity for Wisconsin, for Luke Fickell as the head coach to prove himself, to secure his job, say that he got a top 5 win at Wisconsin, especially after the past couple of years that Wisconsin has had. This is a huge, huge opportunity for Wisconsin to just get the year going with a quick start. And you look at Wisconsin's schedule this year, and besides Notre Dame, it is much more favorable. They're playing more of the bottom half of the Big Ten this year. They play Michigan State, UCLA, Rutgers, Maryland, Purdue. Those are all teams that are at the bottom half of the Big Ten. Their schedule is much lighter this year. So I think Wisconsin, we could see a bowl-eligible Wisconsin team, and that could all start with a win over Notre Dame at Lambeau Field. So, yeah, those are my 2 games that I think in week 1 that could very well surprise some people this year. Like I'm feeling pretty confident about those games just absolutely shocking people. Another game that I think could be quite interesting that will be very close is SMU Florida State. That's actually going to be the last week 1 game. It is September 7th at 6:30 p.m. SMU, a ranked team. They missed the playoffs last year. Didn't really have as great of a year last year as they did in their playoff year. Florida State, they haven't really been good since 2023. It's been about 3 years since Florida State's actually been good. They've taken gambles on multiple transfer quarterbacks. Obviously, in 2024, it did not really pay off for them at all with DJU. In 2025, they had a pretty decent one in Castellanos, but ultimately, he was not the guy that was going to lead them to the promised land. He did lead them to a win over Alabama. He is a solid quarterback, but he started to be a little bit careless with the football, and as a result, started bringing Florida State back to their losing ways in the towards the end of the year. So, I feel like Florida State, they've got something to prove going into this. Kind of like Wisconsin, Mike Norvell, his job is kind of in danger as of right now, and SMU, they're coming in and they're needing a strong start. I think SMU needs to have a strong start with their schedule. They do, they get a little bit of a break against UC Davis, but then they go and play Louisville. They also are playing Virginia this year. They're playing Cal, which Cal, I think, will be a very interesting team to watch this year after they took Oregon's defensive coordinator. He's a really solid coach. So I'm really curious to see how Cal turns around. I think that one could be a scary game. They're also playing Virginia Tech. I think that's a wild card game as well, just with the James Franklin factor, with him bringing pretty much all of his Penn State guys over there. Obviously, SMU is also playing Notre Dame at the end of the year. That is going to be a fun game to watch as well. So SMU, their schedule is not an easy schedule by any means, at least in terms of in-conference play. I feel like in-conference play, SMU has a very tough schedule. And starting off with a win against Florida State, I think, would be ideal for SMU to have. So, SMU is also just a team that I think we probably should keep an eye on because they do have a lot of players that are returning. They had a relatively young roster last year. They are still going to have Kevin Jennings at quarterback, and he showed to be a pretty solid quarterback in the College Bowl playoffs last year, or not last year, 2 years ago, and the season and the regular season before that. So I think, just keeping an eye on this SMU team, I think would be a smart thing to do, especially leading into this Notre Dame game, because a lot of people, and I mean, I kind of said this myself, at least when talking about Notre Dame's schedule, I only really talked about Miami and BYU being those two biggest challenges for Notre Dame. I think if there was a third, SMU would be that third school to challenge Notre Dame. Wisconsin would probably be the fourth, but it's hard to say. I mean, we could be getting a completely crappy Wisconsin team going into this Notre Dame game. And I mean, you look at Wisconsin and what they did last year and how they did last year, and they also, like Notre Dame, had a slow start last year. So I think Wisconsin, we'll see what happens, but I'm not entirely optimistic with that game. But I think SMU Florida State will be a very fun last week one game to start off the college football season. But that's all that I have. Actually, no, there is one more game that I think will be kind of fun, and it's more or less just because it's a rivalry game. It's the Apple Cup, Washington versus Washington State. And that one is an in-state rivalry. It's one that we thought was going to kind of go to the wayside after Washington left for the Big Ten, but we still get to experience that rivalry, which is so much fun. We also have Clemson LSU, which how could I forget about Clemson LSU? Clemson coming in with something to prove after not being ranked in the AP poll this year, and LSU needing to prove the AP voters right. Lane Kiffin needing to prove doubters wrong about his move from Ole Miss to LSU. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that next time because we're out of time. But with that being said, I hope everybody is enjoying Power if you have it. If you don't, hoping that you guys get it back as soon as possible. Next week, going to be talking about pretty much the same stuff, plus or minus a few updates. And That being said, I'll see you guys all on the next one. Schlyde out.